Hey there, we're the Westlaw Pirates and welcome to the show. We're here to share our thoughts on Northwestern athletics and college sports with thoughts and analysis from the visceral to the... Let me just start that over. Hey there, we're the Westlaw Pirates and welcome to the show. We're here to share our thoughts on Northwestern athletics and college sports with thoughts and analysis from the visceral to the statistical. We run our tailgate with the red pirate flag flying high above as we give no quarter, especially the fourth. I'm Sam Walter.
I'm John Lacombe.
And I'm Eric Scuzz, Land O'Lakes Scoutspell.
Oh, you're coated in butter now? Is that what's up?
Definitely not.
Well, tonight we're here to talk about Minnesota. Scuzz's hometown team. Obviously not your team, but your hometown team.
Indeed.
This is a team that's had some recent success the past few years, but maybe not quite what they were. I mean, Minnesota doesn't quite strike fear into the hearts of men the way some of the other teams we previewed already and will be previewing coming up later on do.
Unless that man is a golf course groundskeeper.
Sure. That is absolutely a very fair point.
You could almost say that like their performance in like 2021 and 2022 versus their performance in 2023 and quite potentially 2024, it's almost like a game where at halftime of that game everything flipped and one team furiously stormed back and won the game at the end. It's almost like that kind of pivot, you might say.
It's cold, man.
Wow.
I love it.
So, John, let's take us through this Gopher defense, please.
Well, first of all, for you guys and for anyone listening to this, okay, like, are you sitting down? If not, you should sit down. Like, you need to prepare yourself for this because you're going to be effing stunned by the bomb that I'm about to drop here, okay? So, in 2021,
hang on. Should I just take a sip of water here real quick?
Yeah, exactly. In 2021, Minnesota was third in the nation in time of possession. In 2022, they were fourth in the nation in time of possession. You may remember us talking about this in previous years, okay?
I do recall that may have come up once or twice, yes.
Yes. In 2023, Minnesota dropped to 19th in the nation in time of possession from fourth. Would anyone like to guess what happened? How could you ever possibly guess what the result of this drop could have been? Oh, that's right. Minnesota's defense fell off a friggin' cliff. And Minnesota wasn't even bad in time of possession. They were 19th. They were still top 20 in the nation. But this defense has been such a paper tiger for so friggin' long that all it took for the whole thing to collapse was simply for Minnesota to no longer be the biggest non-service academy time lord in football anymore. And make no mistake, Minnesota caved in defensively. This was the 10th best defense in the conference in basically every major category. So, again, kind of alluded to it earlier, that defense that we all saw in the second half of the Minnesota Northwestern game last year, pretty damn representative of Minnesota's season defensively, and frankly, for anyone who's been paying attention, pretty damn representative of Minnesota's defense for the entire PJ Fleck era. We know that this D is 1,000% reliant on this team's O and always has been. So, where does this leave us in 2024? Well, first of all, we mentioned it in the Michigan State podcast, but again, I just want to give a hearty congrats to Joe Rossi for absolutely fleecing Michigan State and getting him to hire them as their new defensive coordinator. But, and here's the one caveat to all of this, you must extend a congratulations to PJ Fleck for, at least it appears, legitimately making a very solid hire to replace Joe Rossi. So, this is a specific point that we've really hammered home relative to Tim McGarrigle. So, you may think of Tim McGarrigle as a great defensive coordinator choice, or you may not. But either way, you have to recognize that a guy like Tim McGarrigle getting promoted after phenomenal position coach work is exactly how the system is supposed to work. That's a meritocracy. If a position coach over many years does phenomenal work at his job and, appears to have a great command of defensive scheme, that's someone who's earned their shot at the next level. That's exactly what Tim McGarrigle did, and that is exactly what you can say about Corey Heatherman getting hired as Minnesota's new defensive coordinator. So Heatherman was Rutgers linebackers coach for many years, and as we have been talking about for many years, Rutgers has been awesome at linebacker. So this is a guy who has a great track record as a position coach. He turned a unit, again, that is at Rutgers into one of the Big Ten's best linebacker corps consistently in the face of major recruiting disadvantages, which, as we all know, is exactly what Tim McGarrigle did. So you can easily argue that Heatherman is potentially an improvement at DC over Joe Rossi. But the fact remains that Minnesota has been operating under the illusion of a defense for many years now. That is a hard-ass trend to buck. And I very much doubt that the Gophers can buck it in 1 year. So, joking but not joking, the best Gophers defensive player is probably Darius Taylor or a new quarterback or whoever else Scuzz is about to talk about.
It's definitely Darius Taylor, just like spoiler alert.
Yeah, this is the Minnesota way. So, with all that said, I'm going to get out of the way and I'll hand the floor to Scuzz here.
The stage is set, Scuzz. Let's, is this Minnesota team going to go back to being a Time Lord?
Jury's out. They're going to make some progress. They're not going to be quite as bad as last year. And honestly, we expected them to take a little bit of a step back on offense, given they lost their offensive coordinator and Ibrahim at running back. I did not expect them to step back as much as they did on offense, though. 90 fewer total yards per game, a 25% drop in rushing yards, a massive drop-off in passing efficiency. Some of that, like I mentioned, was losing Kirk Chiraka, who went back to Rutgers to be OC there. Some of it is the turnover of key players from what was a very tenured team in 2022. Some of it is that the schedule got a lot harder. They had to play Michigan and Ohio State. But what it all added up to was a middle-of-the-road Minnesota versus the one that was pushing to win the West in 2019, 21, and 22. And that Time Lord factor kind of hangs heavy over all of it. So, I want to dig a little bit deeper in the past before we start to talk about this year. And I want to start with Ethan Kaliakmanis. And we already talked about him on our Rutgers podcast because he's going to go be the quarterback there. But I thought coming into last season, he could really build on the excellent run he had late in 2022 against Penn State, Iowa, and Wisconsin. And I thought as a result of that, the Gophers would be just fine. But instead, he showed zero improvement. His completion percentage was flat. He was much more conservative, losing over 2 yards from his yards per attempt. I think that stat in particular is a direct result of the change in offensive coordinator. When you compare to 2022, Tanner Morgan had such a really high completion percent. He was over 10 points higher than Kaliakmanis. The drop in efficiency, having Kaliakmanis be the full-time starter, was precipitous, and it was lethal for this offense. They dropped below 21 points per game. It's their lowest scoring rate of the entire PJ Fleck era, which is pretty wild considering that they were close to 30 points a game in those seasons with Kirk at the helm. So I do think the signs point to a bit of a rebound this year, but I don't think they're going to be as potent as they were under Chiraka. He was kind of uniquely suited. Him and Fleck were a bit of a perfect match. I don't know why he's left Minnesota twice now. It makes no sense to me, but c'est la vie. The strength of this team, and beyond Darius Taylor, who I'll talk about in a second, is the offensive line. Now, they were in rebuild mode last year. That's part of what I think set this team back. And most of their two deep is back this season. They're big, so they average 315 pounds plus. It's over 322 for the starters. And this bodes really well for Taylor, who was really exceptional last year. He got hurt against us. He missed a handful of games in the middle of the season. He was really good on either ends. He's quick. He's shifty. He can run through contact. He's a complete back. He averaged 5.8 yards per carry last year and put up 159 yards per game. And that was running behind a relatively green offensive line. So, he's much more explosive than Ibrahim was. Ibrahim was a very powerful running back. And I think if Taylor stays healthy, he's going to put up monster numbers. But I also just don't think he has the power where if teams really load up and force Minnesota to beat them on the ground, that he can generate that Time Lord offense in the way that Ibrahim and Tanner Morgan were able to operate so efficiently. I just think the change in scheme and the change in OC doesn't allow for that. The new offensive coordinator is Greg Harbaugh. And then there's another co-OC in Matt Simon. Like, again, these guys have been around Minnesota for a little while. Harbaugh was a tight end coach here before. They're going to try to do, more of the same run, and then throw. But we saw last year, like the feel for the balance there just isn't present. So getting into some of their other skill position players, the tight end has been a real position of strength for them over the years, but looks pretty light this season. That said, they have some real potential in the receiver core. So Daniel Jackson was awesome last year. You may remember him with one of the best college toe taps I've ever seen to beat Nebraska in the opener in the end zone. He put up 800 yards and 8 TDs on a team that really struggled to throw the ball overall. But he was also kind of lost in the middle of the season. I was really surprised when I looked at his stats and they said he played in all 12 games. It was a real stunner to me, or 13 even with the bowl game. And so they kind of lost him, but he was also kind of the only thing they had going last season. Now there's a couple of interesting transfers. So they got a guy from Penn State. They got a guy from Georgia. They don't have a lot of size, but there's a ton of dudes that played a little bit last year. So they've got a lot of kind of unmolded clay to work with in the receiver room. And if Taylor stays healthy, if the offensive line is better, this is going to help those receivers get favorable matchups. And now this is where it gets interesting. The biggest X factor, that's their quarterback. They brought in the FCS Heisman runner-up Max Brosmer. He threw for 8,500 yards at New Hampshire. We've talked about Mark Gronowski from San Diego State, who's the one that actually won that FCS Heisman Award. South Dakota State. Yes, thank you. So how Brosmer's skills translate to the Big Ten is going to be a big question. I think he's going to be an upgrade over Kelly Manis, almost for sure. He had decent accuracy at New Hampshire, 64%, but he only averaged like 7 yards per attempt. There's some of these QBs that come from the SEC, from the FCS, and they just throw bombs all day, and the offenses that they're in are just taking shot after shot after shot. Brosmer's not that kind of guy. Now, New Hampshire ran a run-first pro-style attack, much like Minnesota does. So this is likely going to be a pretty good fit. And as a result, I do think they're going to look more solid. Can they be explosive? Can they dominate time of possession? How consistently are they going to be putting together drives and putting points on the board? Those are the really big questions. They're going to be competent. They're going to have opportunities, and they're going to be able to create some mismatches at time. And Taylor is a bona fide star, but I don't see the pieces to get back to the lofty heights that they've been at in the past.
If you or a loved one is seriously injured by someone else's negligence, hire Kent Simpson of the Simpson Law Group. After over a decade prosecuting murder cases in Chicago, Simpson opened his own firm focused on wrongful death and personal injury cases. He specializes in car, truck, motorcycle, boat, and other transportation accidents, as well as construction accidents, medical negligence, slip and falls, product liability, and more. Millions recovered for clients. No fee unless he wins. The Simpson Law Group. Compassion, empathy, and vigorous advocacy. Go to simpsonlawgroup.com or call 312-332-2107 for a free consultation. And go Cats. So something else that might maybe standing in the way of them getting into the lofty heights is the schedule. Running through it real quick, they start off with a 4-game homestand: North Carolina, Rhode Island, Nevada, and Iowa. Then they travel to Michigan. They're home for USC. They're at UCLA. Then they get a bye week, home for Maryland, at Illinois, at Rutgers. Bye week, home for Penn State, and then finish off at Wisconsin. Yet, I mean that's definitely not the frosty cupcake that they're used to. I mean, the non-conference, like North Carolina, is legit. Like that's a real non-conference game.
It is. They don't have Drake May anymore, which makes them a lot different from the North Carolina team that thumped Minnesota pretty good last year. But these home games, North Carolina, Iowa, USC, and Penn State, that is rough. Like your toughest games are all your home games, minus at Michigan.
Yeah, and again, like I think if what we've laid out is the picture of a team with a mediocre at best defense, an offense that might have something and certainly has an absolutely dynamic running back. Okay, well, if you take that picture, well, that's a team that could make noise, that could do some things. We're not talking about like a bad football team here, but it's just so easy to find 7 losses here. You don't have to stretch at all. Like North Carolina, Iowa, Michigan, USC, Rutgers, which is on the road at Rutgers. And Rutgers is going to be
that feels like a loss on paper.
That feels like a loss.
Yeah.
Penn State, Wisconsin. That's 7 right there. And that's like I'm giving you Maryland. I'm giving you UCLA. I'm giving you Illinois. Like they could be 6-6, sure. But I mean, 6-6 requires this team that has a lot of issues to win at least one pretty big game. And I don't know that they've got that in them or not.
When they play Iowa, Iowa's defense will still be the best unit on the field. When they play, they're probably better than Illinois. They're probably better than Maryland. I mean, I don't know what to expect from North Carolina in the post Drake May era. I don't know who they got transferring in at QB. I'm sure it was someone.
I mean,
but
getting that at home is certainly a big help.
Yeah.
You haven't done like in-depth research on North Carolina, a team that we have no use for having in-depth research on.
I
don't know.
Sorry,
they might be in
bad.
the Big Ten, and they might be in the Big Ten in 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
So we should probably get on that.
Such a good point, John. We're gonna start doing like prospective Big Ten previews.
Yeah. But I mean, right? I mean, not having Drake May is a huge thing, and right, like I don't know exactly what North Carolina's offense looks like. I think they lost at least like one big receiver too off of that team, so maybe that breaks well for Minnesota, and that would be a huge win for them because I mean, the way I look at this schedule, the way I see it shaping up, like a win like that might determine bowl eligibility for them. Talking myself into 7 or 8 seems like
7
a lot.
feels like the max. I guess who knows what this team and what Wisconsin might look like by the end of the month, but Minnesota has generally not fared well at the Badgers. I think they've got one win there in the last like 30 years, and it was 2 seasons ago at the absolute peak of their powers.
Right, and I mean, again, like Darius Taylor's friggin' awesome. Like, there's no doubt about that. And if he's healthy, and like again, it looks like they made a solid defensive coordinator hire. If that works out and it works out really quickly, then maybe there's something here. But
there's 3 teams. There's 4 teams, frankly, on this schedule that are built in a laboratory to stop him.
Right, exactly. And again, there are a bunch of teams that just have a really pronounced raw talent advantage over Minnesota on their schedule. And I don't feel like they're historically a team that does great in that situation. So I don't know. I mean, you give me 6 and a bowl. But yeah, once you start getting into 7, anything above that seems like a real stretch for this team.
Anything else to mention about the Gophers tonight?
What's the floor? Like, lose at Illinois.
Lose to North Carolina. Lose to Iowa.
Maybe lose to UCLA. Like,
yeah, I mean, on the road, like you've just played Michigan and USC back-to-back weeks. You're then traveling across country to UCLA.
It is pretty funny if you want to go doom and gloom with this schedule.
3
you
and
can
9.
find you can find 9 or 10. And
Yeah.
and again, like I don't think that's going to happen, but there are 10 teams on this schedule that can absolutely beat Minnesota. Rhode Island's FCS, and I'm pretty sure Nevada was bad last year. But again, like we don't know. That would be.
They've got nothing in the pipeline after Brosmer. I mean, their backup QB looks to be a guy that was that redshirted at Vatek last year, and then they've got a true freshman, a redshirt freshman, but nobody that pops.
Right. Like I don't and like looking at USC, looking at Illinois, looking at Nevada, looking at Rhode Island, like I expect Darius Taylor to be able to run wild against all of those teams. Like,
you said USC, but I think you meant UCLA.
Not UCLA, right? But frankly, why not throw USC in there? They've been really bad on defense.
Yeah, but the Minnesota defense holding their own.
Yeah, no,
I don't think so.
Yeah, no. So I mean, again, like, we could be charitable. This is because his dad's team. I'll give him 6 wins and a bowl. Anything north of that feels really iffy.
Six
we're
wins
trying to
in the bowl. Is that like 6 seasons in a movie?
Right.
We're trying to convert Dad to a Cincinnati Bearcats fan because the siren call of the grandchildren outweighs the Gophers right now by quite a margin. So it's a pretty easy sell. We're gonna go see the classic Big 12 matchup this year of University of Cincinnati versus Arizona State. Instead of traveling
rich.
to Minneapolis for a Gopher game.
Right.
Anything else to mention before we get out of here?
Oh, one thing we probably should have mentioned is, with the exception of the COVID year, we have played Minnesota every season for
Forever.
Forever.
Was it 05 is maybe the last year?
It's a long way back.
Yeah.
And again, like the COVID year was weird, but if you're looking at standard
I mean,
football
we were supposed to play them in the COVID year, but
Right.
they got sick.
Right. So I mean, if you look at this, is the first time Minnesota hasn't been on our schedule in right. It's a long time. So
yeah,
it's kind of weird.
That is very strange, and I felt that when we were talking about Nebraska too. Like it is that like, and I was even just starting to think about like Minnesota, and they seem to have really, peaked in, 3 of the last 5 years, 3 of the last 4 if you throw out 2020. I don't know that this team can be better than that in the new conference. They sniffed a division win a couple of times and were a win away in those 2 pivotal seasons. And I don't think
Ibrahim behind that line felt like them hitting the ceiling.
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't think there's but now structurally it's impossible. And this is kind of, frankly true for us as well in a lot of ways. But it feels absolutely impossible for them to build on where they were in 2022 and to fly higher.
Well, on that note, let's go ahead and leave it there for tonight. Head to our website, westlawpirates.com, where you can leave comments and questions. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Westlaw Pirates, and email the show, westlawpirates@gmail.com. Tune in next time as we give our visceral and statistical views on Northwestern athletics. And look for us in the west lot of Bryan Field playing the red pirate flag, because we give no quarter, especially the fourth. For John Lacombe and Eric Scasbo and Sam Walter, thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next time.